We didn't have a chance to talk much at AWE. I know both of us were bouncing around, and
Oh yeah,
it was such a great event. For
great
folks
event.
that aren't familiar, Augmented World Expo, one of the largest conferences for VR and XR technology. So many cool gadgets and fun things to play with. So many amazing people that are innovating in the space. What are some of your highlights? The best talks that you saw, best pieces of tech you got to try out, like people you met. Just talk me through kind of your highlight reel of a week at AWE.
I got to have a couple of really cool demos. Some I was super impressed with, and some I was very underwhelmed with. I think if we're talking impressed with, the X-Real Spacetop was pretty cool. My company actually purchased the first one of them, so I got to be one of the first ones to unbox it and have a fun time with that. Same thing like you said, while it's limited, it's a laptop that utilizes glasses and you have an entire field of view, so I can really see how it would be equitable for someone who's like a heavy plane flyer or a frequent traveler, or something where you just want to surf the internet without having anybody else seeing what you're doing. The thing I was probably the most disappointed in, honestly, was haptics. I just didn't feel like what I had built my head up to be until I got to AWE of what haptics could be versus what it really was. We put on these heavy gloves that went all the way to your fingertips, and you're supposed to be able to feel every finger underneath the water and pick up balls and throw them back and forth, and it just kind of felt like one big vibrating pulse that I was grabbing something and picking it up. I couldn't really tell if it was natural, you know?
Welcome back to another episode of MetaRick, where we talk about emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, XR in the metaverse, and Web3 blockchain tech. Today we've got a great guest with us. We've got Brock Riney. Brock Riney is the host of Emerging Technologies in Business, which is a popular YouTube podcast that explores the latest trends and developments in technology and how they are impacting the world of business. Now, Brock actually was kind enough to host me on his show a little while back, and we talked about the inclusivity of the metaverse and the idea of virtual work. We talked about the benefits of B2B business in VR and the future of AR and all that sort of stuff. So definitely worth checking out his show. He does some solo content as well. I watched a clip recently of you reviewing the Vision Pro and kind of giving an overview of that new piece of technology. So Brock, thanks so much for being on the show. As we kick off, maybe we could start with you sharing a little bit about your story and just the work you're doing today and how you got involved in XR.
Yeah, for sure. Ricky, thanks for so much for having me on the podcast. I had a very unconventional route into the world, into XR. I actually started as that lowly sales guy inside of an AT&T store that was trying to sell you a cell phone and make sure that your BlackBerry was going to have a data plan on it, right? Because you wanted to send emails. But it was the first phone that had a full QWERTY keyboard on it. And that was why everybody wanted it. Didn't necessarily mean that they wanted to connect themselves to the internet. If that shows you how far back I go with technology. So I started in the lowly world of AT&T, and I worked my way up, all the way up into being business sales, and eventually I became an engineer. Being the smartest guy in the room, typically when you're dealing with AT&T customers, it doesn't necessarily always mean that you're the smartest guy factually in the room, but at the same time, it gives you the idea that you know what you're talking about at the same time. Eventually, that led to moving into B2B sales because that's where money was at, right? B2B is really where a lot of the dollars and cents are moved in this technological world that we're dealing with right now. And long term, I left AT&T, and I didn't really know which way I was going to go. And I ended up jumping onto a company called Canon XR, and they were jumping into the world of XR, mainly dealing in the world of technicians. So a technician who deals with your car on a day-to-day basis, trying to do an oil change or finding a spark plug that wasn't working, and really trying to inhabit that into the world of AR, VR, and XR. And they started in this kind of assisted reality world. It wasn't quite XR to begin with, right? It started with the RealWear Navigator 500, which is a headset that you put on your head. It has a lens that's right in front of your eye. And for a technician who's working on a vehicle, it makes perfect sense. I no longer have to get up and leave the vehicle that I'm working on. I can pull up a diagram directly in front of my eye line and have an idea what that would look like while I'm working on the vehicle. And the idea being that it would expedite any sort of, or expedite, excuse me, any sort of work that that technician was doing. So we would take a 3-hour job and move it down to a 2-hour job because he was able to then look at the wiring diagram directly in front of his eye line and move back and forth without ever leaving the vehicle. That turned into working on a show that's called Emerging Technologies in Business that we created, where we're just finding all sorts of new technologies in the last 5 years that are really revolutionizing the world that we're living in. We're finding things from lithography and semiconductors, EVs versus gas-powered vehicles, XR, AR, spatial audio, spatial computing, and those type of things really are just changing what you and I see as a day-to-day lifestyle for what the next generation is going to be able to experience. And fortunately, I was lucky enough to put all of those things together and be able to host a weekly show where they let me go learn about something new every week and get to talk to people just like you and have a great time learning about new tech and just being excited about it. And that's really where I got to today. Honestly, it was dumb luck in a certain way. But at the same time, the best advice I could give to anybody who's looking to do something in this field is say yes to everything, right? If someone says, hey, I need someone to go out and report about these cinder blocks that aren't being cut down yet, say yes to that, right? Because then you're going to learn about those cinder blocks. If you need to learn about spatial computing, say yes to that. You're going to learn what you're going to know now that you didn't know the day before just by saying yes to that as well. I think, honestly, the best advice I can give to anybody is just be open-minded. Be open-minded to criticism, too, because the first, you know this yourself, starting a new podcast, your first 5 episodes are not going to be good. They're going to be rough, man. And, like, everyone has to learn. It's almost a trial by fire, realistically, right? And that's really where I got to where I'm at today, where to the point where I can talk to different types of technological advancements that we have never seen before. And I know everything now at a 50-foot or 50,000-foot view that I didn't know before, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that there is this kind of superpower in saying yes to more things. Like at some point there's burnout and you got to be careful to protect your time and all of that. But if you have the time to lean into new interests and new categories, I think there's a lot of learnings and value you can get from that. On an earlier episode, we had Tyler Gillespie from Accenture on, and one of the things that he was talking about when you're advising people on metaverse and XR tech is there's this advantage to understanding the tools in other industries and being able to bring that back to your customer. So if you're talking to like a big tractor manufacturer, a big industrial company, like, yes, you're going to need to learn their business and provide recommendations based on their business. But if you've also worked with consumer brands and healthcare and you have a little bit of knowledge from these other spaces, there's a lot of things you can share with that industrial company that might be really beneficial to how they tell their story about tractors and their business case. So there's a lot of this ability to pull information from different places and be able to provide better advice to that niche that you're trying to serve. So I love that. It's a really cool job that you have, right? Like you've got this this company that's kind of seen something in you and your communication abilities and kind of put you in a situation where you can host this show. You're able to kind of have some support through it. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what that process was like, getting the show off the ground, kind of kicking off a podcast for emerging tech.
Yeah, of course. So the best advice I got, like I mentioned before, is that the first handful that you're going to do are just not going to be to the level that you're going to expect them to be. Number one, have multiple episodes ready to go before you go launch something. Because what happens is there's a graveyard full of 3 to 5 episode podcasts that are out there on the internet right now. We're fortunate. We're over 100 episodes at this point, so we've already got a proven track record of what we're able to do. And we have a process that's in place that didn't come necessarily naturally, but it came through a trial of attribution over time, right? So it's every single time that we ran into an obstacle, we had to find a way to get over that and figure out a way to where we didn't have that issue every single time going forward. So, for anyone that's really starting a podcast, you have to have an audience that you think isn't going to be too niche, that is going to be too small to where you're only going to give yourself this much of an audience view. But at the same time, you have to have consistency. That's the number one key right now for any sort of podcast. Consistently post when you say you're going to post. If it's 3 times a day, great, do it. Who cares? Whichever way you have time to do. If it's once a week, that's also okay too, but stick to your parameters. Learning through the process of starting from nothing to where we are now, there was a lot of hard lessons realistically. Check your audio every single time that you're recording, because you're going to record things, you're going to think that it's perfect, and you're going to go back and realize a mic wasn't plugged in, or a light wasn't turned on, or some sort of different distraction happened at the time. But as you move forward, what you're going to learn is a few things. When you're interviewing guests, have a good conversation piece that's going to be interactive with them and about their background so that you can pull that from them, right? When people know that you've actually done a little bit of research to be able to understand who they are as a person, they're going to be way more open to discuss with you who they are and what they're about than if you're asking those same candid questions that everyone else is asking. Please, for the love of you, don't go ask ChatGPT what the questions are going to be to go talk to MetaRick today. If you do that, MetaRick is going to give you the same exact answers that he's going to give the last 4 guests or last 4 hosts that interviewed him. Ask something important. Rick, why is that guitar behind you important? Was it something that you were given? Did you buy it yourself? Was it something that you saved up for? It's really not that difficult, but you have to ask those meaningful type of questions in order to get the elicit response that you really want, right? We don't want to ask surface level questions. We want to ask something that's going to make them, the guests, feel as if they're heard and that their message that's going to be distributed to our audience is actually going to be responsive and that they're going to gain something out of the information that we're asking for. So when you're dealing with a podcast or anything like this, you just have to be open to change. You can't expect yourself to be perfect. And expect that the first however many of them are not going to be good, and you're going to learn along the time. It changes every time, Rick. It really does.
Yeah, I think there is something about that idea of like personal questions. The more episodes that I've done of this show, I've found the more prepared I am, the more time I put into researching the person that I'm going to be talking to, or like thinking through kind of what kind of things do I want to have in this conversation. The better those conversations tend to go. The other thing I think is the part of why I even joined starting a podcast in the first place is I think that there's something about published versus unpublished content that's really interesting. Like if you unpublish content, that's just the normal conversations you have in your day-to-day life, and they're meaningful. Like that, not everything needs to be content that gets published into the world, right? But I think there is something about sitting down for an hour with someone where you know you're being recorded, you know that it's going to have an audience and go out into the world, where it kind of changes the way you approach the conversation. Like you want to be natural, you want to be comfortable, but you also are hyper attentive. Like you know that someone's going to hear this, so you want to have interesting things to say. You want to be paying attention to the person you're talking to and be an active listener so that you're on, you have a response. You're not like sitting there wandering for 5 to 10 minutes to come up with the next thing to say. So I think there is something about that preparation and that kind of attentiveness that makes podcasting interesting in the first place. As you kind of kick the show off, so emerging technologies is kind of a similar niche to what we talk about on MetaRick. Part of the reason why we're excited to have you on. But that there is like this a bit of a broadness to it. So when you go into finding guests to bring onto your show, the type of stories you want to be featuring, what's your process for finding the next guest and choosing the right people to bring onto the show?
That's a great question, and that's actually another one of the things that I'm always looking at trying to do whenever I'm interviewing someone. I always want them to say that's a great question. For whatever reason, like that's my benchmark of like, okay, that's a check mark on that paper as that fourth grade Brock still trying to do good in school, you know? When I'm looking for somebody to come on the show, I have a two-party thing. One, I'm looking for the technology that I think is going to be interesting to me. Fortunately, I have the ability to go look for things that I think are interesting to our world, things like 3D printing and quantum computing and extreme ultraviolet lithography. I think those things are all interesting just to me, right? So I'll do an individual episode of our podcast explaining what those things are in layman's terms in order to almost be an engineer for the everyday person, right? Fortunately, I have the ability to take something that's really complicated, learn about it, and then make it available via some sort of speech or text to the everyday person who may not be able to understand what the hardcore quantum computing lithography version of that type of speak might be, right? Once we can do that, and then we can explain it in a humane and basic principle to the everyday person, right? Then the idea is to take someone who's an expert in that field and bring them onto the show, and then we can have a dialogue about how this is changing our world. Just to give you an example, speaking with Robert Quinn, who's an expert in semiconductors, I did an episode about extreme ultraviolet lithography, which is in semiconductors, which is making semiconductors as small as 3.5 nanometers. It's hard to quantify, but if you were to quantify it, it would be the size of a hummingbird compared to a skyscraper if you were comparing a nanometer to an inch, if that gives you a size difference, right? So a hummingbird,
teeny
yeah,
tiny.
teeny tiny. Like we're literally to the point now where we're stacking atoms when it comes to the point of creating semiconductors. And just think back to when we went to the moon in 1969. The amount of semiconductors that were on that device that took us to the moon is so drastically different to where we are today. So there's a thing that's called a Cerebrus chip, and it's a 12-inch by 12-inch chip. And I can't remember the number, but I want to say it's something like 2.6 trillion transistors on a 12 by 12 chip. Whereas when we were building a spacecraft that was taking us to the moon before the 70s created, we're talking 10, maybe at the most, because they were that big at the time. And this is the type of transition that we're looking at that's taking us to be ability to do AI and the things that we're never going to see before. Honestly, Rick, the difference that we're going to see in the world in the next 5 years, just based on the computing that we can do, is almost mind-blowing to me. If you think about the quantum computers that are being built right now, even back in 2020, China had a quantum computer that could process information 100 trillion times faster than the best supercomputer in the United States. And if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what else does. It shows us that there is no limitations to what we can do. All we have to do is imagine what we want, and this world can truly produce it these days. We just have to guide the light.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's sit on that topic for a second, because I know before the show you mentioned this idea of quantum computing is like a topic that you're really interested in, and I don't know much about it, frankly. I'm more on the experience layer side. So I have a lot of the guests that I've had on the show so far, a lot of creatives and agencies, and talking more about how do we use this technology to engage with consumers? Like, what's the experience like for an end user to get into a 3D environment? And it's a lot of like the resulting things you can do because of the infrastructure you're talking about. And I saw IBM kind of explain it at a high level, where it's like, well, like, what is quantum computing in the first place? Well, it's a rapidly emerging technology that harnesses the laws of quantum mechanics to solve problems too complex for classic computers. Well, what's an example of a problem that might be too complex for a classic computer? It might be a difficult task like sorting through big databases of molecules, something like that. A classic computer can do very well, like looking at that database of molecules and giving you feedback and information on it. We've been doing that in science forever. And the way that's worked is we run some sort of a simulation or an experiment. We put that data into the classic computer, and then we get information back. But what's really difficult for those computers to do is to do all the experiments and simulations for you. So if you don't get the answers you're looking for, or you need to run another experiment, it's really expensive and it takes a lot of time. And you have to go back and physically run more and more experiments yourself. Versus with quantum computers, the ability to simulate how those molecules behave and be able to run endless simulations of what could happen with different experiments, all of a sudden you can now do that with something like a quantum computer. That said, this is still an emerging technology, right? Like, it's not something that's super established. So as someone who probably knows a little bit more about it, you've talked to some people that are really knowledgeable about it. Does that sound like a relatively accurate definition? And like, what's your take on how established this technology is? Are most big companies using it, or how exploratory is it at the moment?
I think it's super exploratory at the moment, but if, not to be controversial, but if you think that the COVID vaccine came from anything other than quantum computing, you're crazy, right? So think of, if you ever watched the show Price is Right?
Yeah,
you ever see that show? Okay, you remember the show the game Plinko?
Actually, no.
Okay, so
I might be aging myself a little.
Is where you would have all these different lines up at the top, and you would drop a disc, and it would go from different thing, and there'd be different prize amounts down here at the bottom, right? But there's no real control, right? You're dropping a chip, and it's going side to side based on wherever the little knobs are that are out in the thing to make it go down into the prize chute, right? That's basically what we were doing with COVID. We didn't know how to solve the problem. We knew that, hey, if we do this, plus this, it might resolve the issue. Quantum computing is the only way that our society has seen that level of a vaccination come to fruition in such a short of time. And people were super skeptical of it for rightful reasons, because we didn't have that level of computing beforehand. Like I said before, it's 100 trillion times faster than the fastest, smarter computer that we have, right? So the difference with quantum computing is almost everyone thinks of everything, think of it from analog to digital, right? Digital is zeros or ones. That's all it can be, right? You're either a 0 or you're a 1. But with quantum computing, you're both a 0 and a 1 at the same time. And what that allows those computations to do is to not only do standardized thinking like regular computers do now, where, okay, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, right? And we're changing one digit at a time. It's doing all of these in parallel at the exact same time. So we're now taking thousands and millions and hundreds of millions of computations, and we're running those at the exact same time. So basically what we're saying is we're taking that same Plinko chip, except we're taking the field from 0 to 1,000 to 0 to 10 million, and we're dropping the chip. And we're seeing exactly where it goes in real time, as fast as possible, and those computers are computating every one of those possibilities at the same time. And what that does is it brings us to this natural horizon where we're then able to see what's the likelihood of success or failure, more than we've ever seen before in our entire lives. To the point where, Ricky, this is going to change everything, man. Like, there's nothing that's going to be the same. Our way of doing banking will never be the same because of this type of technology. Our way of paying rent and driving cars and everything that we've built to this point has been great to get to this point. But we're also almost looking at technology that's ahead of us as if it were the technology that were behind us. So could you imagine trying to do this show today on dial-up internet? You couldn't do it. Like, it wouldn't even be a possibility. And that doesn't even seem like it's real, right? At this point, when we're talking how easily we can easily connect across the country, across the world, having a conversation like this, those things that were 10 years ago seem like they're so far behind us that those are from the Stone Age. But they're only 10 years behind, realistically. There were still people doing dial-up back in 2013. Lord help those AOL people who got all those discs and they never threw them away. They just wanted to get their 40 free hours of free internet, Ricky. That's all they wanted. That's probably dating you. You never got one of those discs, did you?
Yeah, totally did
Oh
not.
my gosh, now I feel old.
Yeah, it's funny because like I hear stories from a lot of folks like going to AWE, which we can talk about a little later. But I'm excited to get your thoughts on the conference a month ago or a couple months ago. But it basically at AWE, something I thought was really cool was that there's this wide range of people. Some folks have been around 10, 20 years playing around with VR and extended reality, and I thought that was really cool to experience because I've maybe met like 5 to 10 people like that. I've met a lot more people that are kind of in the middle somewhere where maybe they were marketers or creatives or come from some other background. And then in the last five years, maybe 10 years, like in the era of Oculus, have picked one up, tried it out, and started dabbling with VR and extended reality. But being just immersed by all these people, they're like, no. We've been around like 20, maybe even 30 years. Like there's some people that have been doing this a long time. And I just felt that was so inspiring that like we see a market dip like it has in the last 6 months and people get distracted with other hype cycles. These people have been doing it before there even was a hype cycle, and people have been building to create this stuff. So kind of getting back into quantum computing for a second. Obviously this was like a big piece of infrastructure for Black Mirror with Jonah's Awful, which has been the talk of the town. This social commentary on AI with the writer's strike and SAG joining the writer's strike. It's like super, super timely. That episode has like become this metaphor for a lot of very controversial topics around AI right now. Quantum computing is like the core piece of infrastructure they use in the show to highlight this is possible. With a quantum computer, we can create infinite real-time simulations on the data that we're tracking of you and digital twins of famous people to play those parts. How far away is quantum computing from being able to do that? And like, what are some of the friction points you see? Because if it's still theoretical, if it's still in that emerging phase, like what are the potential blockers that prevent this from working?
We still have a little bit of a way to go. So Google just announced their pretty big quantum computer not too long ago, but I don't think that that's even going to have a step in the world as far as Hollywood actors or AI or how that world is going to play, because we've already seen deep fakes. We've already seen how well they can be manipulated. The technology is only going to get better. In fact, I actually saw a LinkedIn article, or it may have been something on Facebook, where someone was offering $900,000 a year to be an AI actor for one of these Hollywood studios, right? It would be so easy for you or I to walk into a studio, have our voice manipulated to sound like Bradley Cooper, have our face manipulated to look like Bradley Cooper, and we could play that role realistically today. It's not that hard to do.
Just to clarify that real quick, though, because I know that's been a big kind of clickbaited thing that's been around, so I've read into that. The Netflix posting, so what that was about is it was actually like a product manager role.
That's fair.
For running and operating Netflix's AI into making production of television more streamlined. And the role wasn't for $900,000. It was listed as a pricing range from $250,000 to $900,000. And that's because in California, there's a law now where you legally have to put your salary range on job listings.
Interesting.
So as much as they put $900,000 at the top end of that, that's what all of the media and articles have been pulling from it.
Isn't it funny?
Even $250,000 plus is a large amount of money, like for a role, right? Like it's not nothing. But I just wanted to put some clarification on that.
Hey, no, that's fair. Isn't that terrible that that's the world that we live in now, where we have to, if you read something, you then have to go to 30 to 45 minutes worth of research just to verify that what you read was legitimate? I hate that so much. It's the reason why I don't put out anything that I don't know is like factual, right? I can tell you speculation all day long, but it's baffling to me that that's where we live in this world. But I don't think that that's going to get any better either, honestly. The digital age that we live in is only going to be more consumer driven. And it's going to be shock art and pop art. Like, that's just how it's going to be, realistically. That's what's going to hit those mainstream headlines, sadly. But for those artists who are striking right now, I can see replacing actors. Not trying to be cynical, right? I'm an actor myself. I've gone through acting. I've done all the fun stuff with that. But I can see replacing actors. I can't see replacing writers, because any of these AI applications that we have, they're terrible writers. Their jokes are terrible. And if we think that that's what's going to take over our world, I mean, yes, it helps from the day-to-day stuff, but it's not going to help long-term for like the creativity process. And I think that's where actors and actresses will separate themselves too, realistically. There's no way that you're going to see an Academy Award go to anything that's going to be AI created in our lifetime, at least in my opinion. I think that there's a true art to what people do, and a lot of that's going to get lost, unfortunately, sadly, in the technological advancements that we're seeing.
I've got a kind of a hot take on this. My view is very controversial, and I have a lot of friends. I want to preface this by saying that are actors in LA, professional actors that are striking right now, and I've talked to them about this, and they're actually some of the better people I have talked to about this from the industry. Like they aren't super defensive about it. They really are seeking to understand the technology, and I have a lot of respect for people that can have their jobs impacted by this and be able to have real conversations about it. My take is that for writers right now, I empathize with the fear over income and like your stability in your job. There's a big change that's about to happen. There's going to be a lot of skills and adoption that you need to get to the future of writing. It's going to change a lot. But I do think the actors are the ones that are at the highest risk, because essentially an actor is a piece in the story. You're a subject being manipulated by a director, by a writer to tell a story, and your ability to give interpretations of what's in their head is the value that you're providing in a lot of ways. Now, if avatars get lifelike enough, which looks like it's happening, if simulated voices and talking and emotion gets lifelike enough, if we direct it right in a computer, that's going to be very replaceable. I think world building, this is actually the most exciting time you could ever be a writer or a director, because what AI is allowing you to do is, if you're a writer or director, you can now produce 1,000 different versions of what's in your head and kind of cherry pick the best ones out of all of your ideas and kind of hone them down and sculpt them. And it's kind of like Wes Anderson creates animated versions of all of his movies before he actually goes and produces the movie, and it lets him be really efficient with his production process and save a lot of money on the actual shooting of the film, because he's taken his vision further visually in his head before he even steps on set. I just had an interview with the CTO of Azure Games, where they're doing this with video game production. They still have a studio of people that's building the game and the characters and the story, and I love the way he talked about prioritizing this, where it's like the characters, the heroes, the villains, and even the NPCs, that's where the human hours are going for the most part, is developing those traits of characters. But then they're leveraging AI to do the world building and the ground and the mountains and the water and everything that wraps around them, and then optimizing processes for the NPCs and the characters. And they're giving humans AI as a tool to build more robust worlds. So I think if you're in the creative director writer seat, things are about to get very exciting for you over the course of the next 5, 10, 20 years. Now, before I pass it back, because I know I held the mic a little bit here, is I also want to caveat all of that by saying that doesn't mean that they shouldn't get paid. Right now, there's a totally separate issue from AI. AI's taken the front of the stage, but there's a whole other issue with writers just not getting paid and streaming visibility. And there's other issues in the writer strike that's not just about AI, and I think those are really valid things that need to be talked about.
Yeah, nobody needs to be getting a 32-cent royalty check for being in a commercial. Like, let's just be real. There's no reason for that, right? Here's a question I have for you too. So it's funny, we have opposite views on how that's going to play out. I actually think it's going to be easier for the actors and actresses than it will be for the writers, right? Now, writers, the reason why I think it's going to be harder is that there's going to be far more competition now, right? So the thing that made you special is no longer special, we can take 80% away of your specialness away. Meanwhile, the people who can be actors and actresses who can perform those ways in a certain way that maybe a computer can't reanimate yet, not saying long term, but yet, right? Those are the ones who have a special niche, and I don't know where that line ends. Here's my big question for you, though, Ricky, right? With the Apple Vision Pro coming out, and now thinking that we're going to have something right here, this is what we're doing from now on. What's going to happen to our eyesight long term? Because the whole idea is we're supposed to have pass-through, right? Yeah. But if we have a screen right in front of our eyes, 40 hours a week as if we're working, just like this, what's going to happen there long term? Is long vision even going to matter in 40 years, realistically, to our society? Or do we just get rid of this somehow, and we have it projected sideways from some sort of projector? I don't know. But I'm worried about humans' long-term eyesight if this becomes something that's of mass adoption, having something over our eyes all the time.
So I don't know enough about optometry to have a great answer on this. There's a company called New Eyes that's worth looking into, where their whole business model has been optimizing eyesight through extended reality lenses and stuff. It's a really interesting business.
Sounds like they're about to make some money.
It's a really interesting company. I'm going to kick a question back to you on a similar topic, though.
Sure.
So you mentioned the Vision Pro. You mentioned the direction that these headsets are moving with pass-through. At AWE, I think you had a chance to try the Think Reality VRX by Lenovo. We were demoing that at that booth, and it was interesting because I do think mixed reality is the future of these headsets.
I agree.
The thing with mixed reality is that it's kind of Palmer Luckey's perspective on it, right? It's like, it's not augmented reality is not going to be a clear lens where we project holograms onto this clear lens of what we actually are seeing. Instead, it's going to be a recreation entirely of what's around us.
Yep.
Which means that what we're seeing isn't actually the world, it's a recreation of the world around us. That could be problematic, right? So like, now defining what's real and what's not real is going to happen based on the hardware and the software, not based on physics.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the risks associated with that, of where that could go wrong? And maybe I have a tendency to ask 3 or 4 questions at a time, so I'll keep it simple there. Like, what do you think the risks are with that type of site if we start to do that more and more in our day-to-day?
Well, the first thing that's going to happen is Olivia is going to put an Apple Vision Pro on her head and walk into oncoming traffic and get hit by a bus. That's the reality, honestly. So spatial computing is great. And even yesterday, so I updated the Oculus Pro that I have, and the new update that they just put on yesterday from the visual pass-through was pretty damn impressive, if I say so myself. Like, I'm in full color, I can see everything. Sure, it looks a little grainy, but that's what the pass-through is. I'm expecting by the time that the Oculus 3 comes out that will only get better. And like, that's how everything's going to get. It's not going to get worse. It's only going to get better. We have all had those flip phones or terrible phones that we had that had terrible cameras on them, and then 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 came out, and it was astronomically better than what it initially was. We're still in the infancy stages still, realistically. Computers, when they first came out, they couldn't do what they could do 10 years later or even close to those things. And the same things are going to be for these XR headsets. With the Apple Vision Pro, a few things stick out to me. One, it's the first headset that's really designed for you to wear all the time. I haven't seen anything else that's designed to try to incorporate itself into your life more than the Apple Vision Pro. The same way that Tesla did it with the car industry. We're not trying to give you a car. We're trying to give you a different solution to your life. And if anybody who can figure that out and do it really, really, really well is going to dominate the market. Like, there's not even a question. Apple has a couple of things going for it. One, that it has all of the app just nativeness, right? So the ability to do FaceTiming and save everything and AirDrop and just all the things that we have all Apple heads become, hooked over the last 5 years. I'm still an Apple guy over an Android guy, but I'd give either one a shot, but all my stuff works on Apple, and it always works every single time, and there's a reason why I stay loyal there for that reason. Apple did a couple things really great. One, they got rid of the controllers. It was the biggest unnecessary thing that every other provider, for the most part, not saying everybody, like XReal did a great job with those glasses. The XRV is really good. A lot of these newer ones that are coming out are just completely different than what we've seen before. But it's going to be that ability to move from AR to VR and have a toggle or have the ability to live in both worlds. It's really going to make you stand out. AR is the quintessential basis of how we're going to use everything going forward. My question really is, how much longer are we going to have these, right? What's the point? I don't need a phone. I don't need a tablet if I have something over my face all the time. What am I going to use it for? And I think it's going to eliminate a lot of different categories, Ricky. I think the TVs that we have in our houses right now, what's the point? If I have a headset that then can project it 100 inches or in front of my face or whatever it needs to be, I feel like I'm going backwards, you know?
I think that's the big bet that Apple's making, right? Is like
yeah.
I forget where I read this, but I really liked the perspective that they're not so much betting on the future being the spatial 3D internet. They're hedging their bet that if they don't do this, they have everything to lose.
Yeah.
Right? Like if this is the future and they don't get it right and they're not a part of it, no one's going to need a MacBook anymore. No one's going to need an iPhone anymore. And whoever wins the face wearing spatial computing future is going to just completely take out that $1 trillion business. And so I think that that's the biggest reason why they need to play such a big investment in it, is more to hedge a bet than it is that they believe fully in it. The second thing I think is interesting is your comment on not needing like controllers not controllers, the lack of a need for iPhones and screens and these other things. I'm not sure that those will go away right away, because the thing is, this hardware is still so individual. Like I can put a headset on and I'm experiencing it, but if you're in the room with me, we can't share that experience together very easily yet. And so being able to sync that up between two headsets, having it be socially common enough for us both to have one on, having the form factor be lighter, all of that is stuff we're moving towards. But I'm still a little hesitant to say that that's going to happen quickly. Like we still haven't seen a whole lot of traction for that to be the next step. Like even as cool and badass as the Vision Pro looks, and as much as I want it, and as much as I'm definitely going to use it, it's still a little heavy. It's still got the battery pack detached that has to like hang on your pocket or set on your desk or something. Like we're still not quite at that level where people are going to be walking around the city with these on their face yet. And XReal's great. XReal, for people that aren't familiar, they're the lightweight. They're about the same as a pair of sunglasses, but they're also much more limited. All you get is basically a TV screen in front of you.
Web only. Yeah. No applications, but still cool. Super cool.
Super cool. And I think that's a good segue into AWE. We didn't have a chance to talk much at AWE. I know both of us were bouncing around, and it was such a great event.
Great
for
event.
Folks that aren't familiar, Augmented World Expo, one of the largest conferences for VR and XR technology. So many cool gadgets and fun things to play with. So many amazing people that are innovating in the space. What are some of your highlights? The best talks that you saw, best pieces of tech you got to try out, like people you met? Just talk me through kind of your highlight reel of a week at AWE.
I definitely had a fantastic week. It was my first time ever being there, and getting to experience everything. I got to have a couple of really cool demos. Some I was super impressed with, and some I was very underwhelmed with. I think if we're talking impressed with, the XReal Spacetop was pretty cool. My company actually purchased the first one of them, so I got to be one of the first ones to unbox it and have a fun time with that. Same thing like you said, while it's limited, it's a laptop that utilizes glasses and you have an entire field of view, so I can really see how it would be equitable for someone who's like a heavy plane flyer or a frequent traveler, or something where you just want to surf the internet without having anybody else seeing what you're doing. So that was really, really neat. Meeting a lot of the people who were on the podcast that I had never met before was really, really interesting. More than anything else, that was by far my favorite part. I think I met 15 or 20 different guests that had been on my podcast previously and just never got to see them in person because we're in different parts of the world. But thanks to COVID, we all kind of got used to having this, digital interaction style of world. The thing I was probably the most disappointed in, honestly, was haptics. I just didn't feel like what I had built my head up to be until I got to AWE of what haptics could be versus what it really was. So I took a tour that was utilizing Lowe's. It was using haptics as the haptics, and it was using Vario for the headset. And Vario is, in my opinion, as close to reality as we're ever going to get, or at least where we're at right now. I can't promise that for long term, but for right now, if you're looking for something to look realistic, Vario has it figured out. Their reality cloud is par none. They're great. Haptics was the one that I was kind of, lukewarm about, honestly. Like, we put on these heavy gloves that went all the way to your fingertips, and you're supposed to be able to feel every finger underneath the water and pick up balls and throw them back and forth, and it just kind of felt like one big vibrating pulse that I was grabbing something and picking it up. I couldn't really tell if it was natural, And to me, if you're really going to do haptics, do them right. Otherwise, don't bother with it. I think that's where Apple went well, right? They didn't even bother with the haptic side. Like, no, we're going to deal with that stuff later once we got it figured out. Let's just worry about the headset right now. On the converse side of that, Oyo did a really good job of doing something super simple but making it work really well. So what they did was they took basically a glorified TENS unit, which is the things that you put on your body to emit electrical shocks in order to relax muscles and things like that. And they did a full body suit, almost like a little zip up biker vest that you would have that would have multiple attachments along your body. That actually felt what haptics should feel like long term, right? So my brain is always going to go to Ready Player One. I want someone to hit me in the top right hand shoulder and feel it here, not over here, right?
Yeah.
They did it the closest way of reality that I've seen so far. Outside of that, haptics is nowhere close to where we want it to be. I think we're so much further along in the XR world than we are the haptics world. That world is still going to need somebody to be the new Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, whoever you want to call him, Tim Cook, whatever, of that industry, and completely do it over again. And I don't know where to start. I'd love to tell them where to start, but I don't know. But it's not where it should be. And if we're going to accept that into a daily reality where we can then put a headset on and truly pass a Turing test of not realizing if I'm talking to Ricky on this podcast or if I'm talking to Ricky on this headset, I need to have that ability for my body to understand that this is reality. And until we get to that point, we're never going to pass the Turing test, in my opinion. Way off.
Super valuable take. I didn't get a chance to try the haptics. The wait list on that demo was crazy. So I'm glad that you had a chance to actually try it. I forget, and I wish I didn't forget the name of this company. There's a little tiny company pre-funding that was doing haptics of textures that was really impressive to me, and I wish I remembered the name so I could shout them out right now. I'll try and put it in the description if I can find his business card. But essentially what they did was a small little metal plate that you just touch your fingers onto, and then it'll do micro textures. So the difference between a really rough surface or a really smooth surface, or these little tiny details. And it was really good. It was awesome. Very impressive to me. I don't know how you could replicate that as a glove. I'm not sure it's possible with their tech, but the idea of being able to have a cube and something like a sandbox VR or a room dedicated to VR, I could totally see these virtual objects with textures. The question I'd have for you with haptics, we and I'll preface this with a little short story. We have one of the parties or after parties at AWE. We were joking around about if you could create any VR app, what would it be? And this one guy was like, if haptic suits get good enough, I want to create a 10-second demo where Bruce Lee just beats the crap out of you. And you can actually feel it. And all of us were just dying laughing. We're like, who wants to get their ass kicked by Bruce Lee? Well, maybe everyone. Like, it'd be a kind of a fun demo. Where do you think, if we do get haptics right, like if we can get that vest to work perfectly, or we could get those gloves to feel more real, what's the use case for it? Like, where does haptics make a big difference versus where it doesn't mean as much?
Selfishly, in the gaming world, that's just for me, right? Imagine playing Call of Duty and being able to feel when you're running through grass, to have it whipping by your shoulders or crunching down, feeling gravel crunch between your feet before you're shooting, feeling a recoil. Those type of things are going to be huge, obviously. But when you're talking realistically and in society, if we can find a way to promote education and healthcare more than anything else, we're doing society a good job. And to me, healthcare has got to be number one. Now, don't get me wrong, education is super important, but keeping people alive should always be our number one concern. If we're not utilizing the best technology that we have in order to save patients that we might not have been able to save 5 to 10 years ago, I feel like we're doing ourselves a short-sighted duty as a society, realistically. Some of these things that we didn't have available before can be used as a helpful tool today. Now, haptics, as far as that's concerned, think of it like a grown adult version of Operation. You remember that kid when you were a game, you had to reach in and pull the thing out. Don't touch the sides because you're going to die if you pull that rib out. But now we're doing that with real humans. We're able to do a 3D replication of what their lung or liver or body or spine looks like by taking the same CAD model that we were taking from these machines before and now being able to replicate them in 3D. For people that are able to go through that process and be able to feel, hey, this is where you don't go, that's a no-go zone, even if it's as simple as that, can save lives. I'm all about that. That's my number one thing. Outside of that, the world of possibilities are kind of endless. We won't see ourselves driving in this world in the next 5 to 10 years, realistically. We're probably going to have a headset on while we're in the car, realistically, or some sort of different version. I also don't know this. I don't know if we're going to have a headset, realistically, in 5 to 10 years. It may just not be required. It may be where we put headphones in and some sort of display just automatically gets displayed in front of our faces holographically. I don't really know where we're going to end up, Ricky. But when it comes to the haptic side of it, it could control so many different things. It's just too many to quantify into one specific area. But education, healthcare, I think those are the primary factors that we should be looking at. Gaming, of course, will always find those things. But what I'm excited to see is what happens when we start moving these things into like our sports world and things like that. Like, how are we going to make helmets safer via those type of things too? What happens if you, as a NFL fan, want to wear the LA Rams jersey, and yours will give you haptic feedback? You can feel every time the quarterback gets hit. Those are realistic things that could come out. How fun would that be? Well, who are you going to be today? Oh, I'm Matt Stafford. No, I'm Cooper Kupp. Well, Cooper Kupp just got line drive going on a slant, and he got obliterated, and now your ribs hurt. But you're part of the team, right?
That's such an interesting use case, because it's like there's a bunch of I think Chris D'Elia has the stand-up joke where he makes fun of guys for wearing other guys' names on their back, football jerseys and stuff. And like, I'm a sports
I earned
fan.
it.
I wear Padres jerseys and go to the Padres game across the street at Petco and stuff. But the idea that you could actually like have a physical sensation when someone hits a home run, or
wouldn't that
when
be
someone
awesome?
gets sacked or something, that's a really cool idea for engagement. I've never thought of haptics for a marketing purpose before. That's actually the first time I've had someone.
You're wearing a Fernando Tatis jersey, my man, and he just got beans. Your left shoulder now hurts. Like, yeah, that's called pride, right? That's team pride right there. I took one for the team, literally.
It builds empathy, right? Like, it makes you feel more attached to, like, because that's what marketing's becoming more and more about now, is like, how do you give more ownership to your audience? How do you make them feel like they're a part of the story as it's happening? The other thing with education is interesting, because I agree. I think that's one of the biggest use cases people talk about for XR, for haptics, for all of this stuff. And when I was at Engage, that was a big thing, is like how do you do a healthcare exercise or an industrial exercise where the machinery is really expensive or there's huge risks like lives being lost. It's very dangerous. If you can simulate that environment in a lifelike way, that's really valuable because you're keeping people safer, you're saving a bunch of money, and you're able to provide that training. But I'm still finding, even with the cost savings, the budget for that is very difficult to find. Education tends to be under-resourced. If you're talking about public education like universities, they're constantly fighting for grant money to fund all their programs. It's really difficult to find the money sometimes. And then on the corporate side, same thing. Like there's multi-million-dollar HR budgets, but they see that as more of a cost center a lot of the time. It's harder for them to see that as an investment when it's not driving revenue directly like a marketing or a sales campaign might. So I'm curious from the folks you've talked to if you have any insight on how people think about budgeting for those things, or like where to find the money to fund an education program.
Well, I can tell you this. So my oldest daughter is 12 years old. When she came to our world, that was when the first iPad was announced and released into the world. We're still living in a world where kids don't have iPads in school, which is honestly pretty baffling to me. Like, we don't even have tablets. We're still using desktop computers for some ungodly reason. It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't sit here and tell you that I have a good foresight in how to control our educational budget. I just know that it's broken, right? Obviously, what we're doing is not sending down the most useful information and technology that we can to the next level of our generation. And that's a primary fault of our generation right now. We have to give these kids every avenue to be better than we could ever be. And that's what every parent wants to be. They want their kids to be the best version of themselves and be better than they were. And we want to give them that life. But what's happening is that there's a lot of bureaucracy that continues to happen where, think of it this way, someone's either an Apple fan or they're an Android fan. And either one of those people could be that block to make sure that those kids get the right end device. And that's just the beginning of it, let alone when you're talking about XR, which is still an unproven technology for the most part, right? We're not 12 years into it like we were with tablets. Tablets now are just become part of our everyday lives. Now it's more of a standard. But we haven't reached that level of adoption as of yet. I think one of the last reports I ever saw was that there's less than 10% of the country who's ever even witnessed the XR world, which is crazy to me still, but it's not in that everyday average of the cost efficiency yet still. Like, so even the Oculus Quest 2 is $400. Sometimes it was $300. For some folks, it's still out of range, realistically. You want to afford your bills more than you care about playing with a toy, let alone someone who's working 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week to go play with a toy whenever you have a time off. So for the kids who don't have access to it, that's really where our government has to step in and make ourselves relevant in providing a better healthcare system and better technology to ensure that these kids have a leg up. Or actually now, it's not even a leg up, it's a leg down if we don't have this technology compared to other countries that are across the world. China is destroying us as far as technology is concerned to what they deserve to their end-all educational process. And we're not even close. So if we can't figure out how to get XR in the hands of our kids as quickly as possible, it's only going to further stunt the growth that we've seen. Apple's going to change all that a lot, simply because those are going to become available. But look at the same version. The first version is $3,500. That's not everybody. You know, it's the same thing as the Apple or the Apple iPad was when it first came out. The first 5 years is not going to have consistent adoption simply because people can't afford it. Some people will be able to put money together to be able to do it, but everyday consumer, it's outpriced right now. But it's up to the developers, in my opinion, for this Apple Pro device to make it equitable for everybody. What we don't even know yet is what the developers have come up with that will help everyone's day-to-day lives, and that's where the big new 1949 gold rush is at right now. If you are a developer, if you have an idea, if you think of something that could happen in the XR world, go download that developer kit, go ask for it right now and go make something, because first to the party are definitely going to feast, and they're going to have a really good time over the next couple years as this device continues to get adopted, let alone be it educational side. Educational, healthcare, whatever way you want to go, entertainment, anything right now. Content is content. Remember when the first iPads and iPhones came out and there was minimal things in the App Store? There's not 500 things to choose from or 5,000 things to choose from. If you're one of 500, you're going to get recognized versus 500,000, which is where we're going to be in 4 years, realistically, for that device.
Yeah, I'm glad you. I mean, it seems like a lot of things keep coming back to Apple Vision Pro, but this is one where I think it really matters because people focus on that $3,500 price point and think it's like going to prevent a lot of people from accessing it. But I have a few counterpoints, and I've shared these before. But one, Apple stores are probably the most advanced retail experience out. Nike and a few other companies are competitive, but I think Apple is like one of the best retail experiences. It's streamlined. It's an ecosystem.
It
they
just
have the
works.
Customer base, and even if folks don't, sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I still got you. You're good.
Oh, so strange. My monitor just crashed. But
Oh, sorry.
so, yeah, I was like, damn, that was scary. But at least it's still working. But basically, if one of the thoughts on the Apple ecosystem is that it gives people access to try it, even if they're not going to buy it. They could go into any Apple store and demo the thing, and they might walk out with more iPhones. It might be a marketing channel for them to sell other products better, but it gives more exposure to that audience you mentioned that hasn't even put on a headset before or tried it. A lot more people will if they're in Apple stores. The second thought, Apple Pay lets you finance things now. So even if it's $3,500, a lot of people finance their MacBooks. A lot of people finance their iPhones that are $1,500 already. So that $3,500 price point spread over 2 or 3 years at a monthly fee, all of a sudden it's not that expensive.
Right.
So I think that opens a lot of doors. The last thought on Apple is that with education, with MacBooks back in the day, they just gave them away. They would give $1 million or $2 million worth of hardware to an individual university and just write it off on their taxes. They've got $1 trillion of value as a business and plenty of things they need to write off against. And they were investing in the future, where if it's used in education, all of those students will grow up, take professional jobs, and want to use Macs. So I think Apple, it's hard to say, and I don't want to bet everything on Apple's just going to make the industry a success, but it's a big impact, and I don't think it's something we can ignore. One other question, and I know we're getting close to time here, but out of all of the companies that are involved in XR right now and kind of dabbling with it, what are one or two examples of folks that you think are doing it right? They're really nailing their strategy around this, and they've impressed you in how they've dabbled in the space.
There's a couple. Groove Jones is a good one that maybe not a ton of people know about, but I'm local here to Dallas, Texas, and they're a marketing firm that's out here that's utilizing XR for marketing, and they do a great job. Everything that you look for, it's everything that you want to be encompassed if you're looking to do marketing and XR and augmented reality or extended reality in any aspect. And there's not a ton of marketing companies that I think are doing it right, and they're doing it exceptionally well. They do a great job. They do a lot of work with a lot of sports franchises that are here in Dallas, so that's definitely one that I would keep an eye out for. Groove Jones is only going to continue to grow over long term. Another one that I would say that is kind of interesting, it was one that I finally got to meet up at AWE. I'm trying to think which one would be the best. It's probably Tilt 5. Tilt 5 is super interesting. They're not necessarily true XR, but it was something I was super interested in. It's you ever watch the show Star Trek at all?
Yeah, is Tilt 5 the tabletop games?
Yeah, tabletop game. Yeah.
Immersive board games and stuff?
Yeah, and I just thought it was the coolest thing of all time. So my older brother, was really into Star Trek when we were growing up, and he was really into 3D chess, so it would be multiple layers of chess. And I mean, I got into chess for a certain amount of it, but I got to see their board game, got to experience it firsthand, and I just thought that was what was the closest thing of bringing something that was super sci-fi into true reality, right? The next thing would be somebody who could do a replicator of where I want to ask for a cupcake and get one instantly. Well, we're not quite there, but we're working on it. But theirs, they finally took the gaming aspect and they transitioned it to just this tabletop game where you could play with folks not only inside the same room, but you could play with them across the country or across the world. And me and myself and a couple of my buddies have been able to play a couple of games together, being worlds apart and being able to bring that all together. And for the fact that it works as well as it does, like, that's a true testament to, that tech. A lot of things end up being a lot of white noise in tech where they say they have a great product and then you try it and it doesn't work the way that you intend it to. So when you find something that truly works to the level that it does, or that they're saying that it's going to, those are the ones that you want to put your stamp of approval on, I think in XR, as far as the headsets and everything are concerned, the biggest change I saw this year was everyone wants to be able to transition from AR to VR. That wasn't the big case previously, right? Even all these pass-through headsets, like the pass-through on the Oculus Pro 3 days ago was not nearly as good as it is today. It went to full color. Sure, it looks a little grainy, but we're in full color now. Like, I could walk around my place with this headset on with no issue. I think those types of advancements and being able to have some sort of toggle that's light is going to be the big key. I saw a lot of them that weren't light. We would go from augmented reality where I could see, hey, I'm on the Ricky podcast and I've got all these different notes up here, and they would transition into a darker screen and a video, but you could still hear the whirring of all the gears and everything. The people who are going to make it seamless are going to be the ones that are going to succeed long term, realistically. I would say the Oyo thing, as far as the haptic feedback, that was pretty cool. That was the first time I was like, all right, that's decent haptic feedback. The other one was a pure disappointment. The other one that I found was a company called Cleanbox that was kind of impressive.
Very cool.
So
Yeah,
I didn't even think about them at first because I didn't think about keeping a headset clean. But that's a reality, right? So in a lot of office settings and a lot of places that we go, we may have to go do some sort of trial or training or something where I'm going to take a headset off of your head and put it on mine. And especially in the world of COVID and everything else that we've lived in, sanitation is pretty necessary, right? Like, you wouldn't go to the bathroom and not wash your hands. Why wouldn't I wash off a headset before I put it on my face, right? I don't want to deal with my hands being gross, but why would I want my face to be gross, right? So I thought that was one of the best iterations I saw there because they cover it in a nanotechnology that keeps it from having any sort of issues, and they use UV to clean it off whenever they're going in between usage. And that was a really smart decision to make because I think that it's going to be a necessity until we either continue or get rid of these headsets. And I don't know which way we're going to go long term. I don't think it's going to be a full headset. I'm expecting some sort of, I don't know, my own hopeful expectation, I guess, in 10 to 15 years, Ricky, is that I've got something in my ear that I just tap like an AirPod and it just pops up that screen. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of my expectation of where we're going to go. I don't know how we're going to do it yet, but I expect you to figure it out between now and then.
Yeah. No, I like Cleanbox a lot too. Their team's really friendly, very welcoming. Their product's
good
great.
Team.
And they're thinking about where to bring the product. They've got a great go-to-market plan. And I was really impressed by their business when I stopped by.
Me
there
too. I really was.
And it's interesting because it's like they say that your phone is probably the dirtiest thing in your entire house as far as bacteria. Like, who washes their phone? Next to nobody. And so, like, having like a clean wipe on your phone, or like they have these UV boxes for that now too. Like, it just makes sense to me. With the phone is more personal, so you're like feel more comfortable because you're the only one touching it.
Right.
But if a headset is getting shared amongst you and your friends, or like a group of people, like if an Apple store has a demo room and it's just people coming in and out using the headset all day, keeping that clean makes a lot of sense. Well, hey, like we broke over a little an hour. This has been a great conversation, Brock. Let's go ahead and give you an opportunity real quick before we wrap it. Where can people find you? What are you working on? Anything you want to plug?
I appreciate that. Yeah, so if you get a chance, go check out my own podcast. It's called Emerging Technologies in Business. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/ETIB. You can find me on basically every social media platform that you can find out there, even Threads now. We became a partner there too. ETIB Podcast is more than likely the place to find me. Of course, Brock Riney, you can email me if you'd like to as well. If you ever want to be on the show, it's brockr@kincanonxr.com. And I got to tell you, Ricky, I was just excited to be on the show, man. It was fun. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. We've got some great content next week, and we'll be linking Brock's the words. We'll be linking Brock's channel for his podcast as well as his LinkedIn stuff down in the description. So click all that, give us a subscribe and a follow, and we look forward to sharing more content next week.